My name is Serena Cole, and I want to tell you the truest story I have ever lived. Not the kind of truth you find in headlines or in the carefully edited highlights of someone's life posted to the internet, but the raw, trembling, embarrassing, beautiful, messy truth of how I fell in love with the most unexpected woman in the world, and how she saved me without ever meaning to, and how I saved myself, and how those two things turned out not to be in conflict at all. I was 26 years old when I started working as a cleaner at Harlow and Associates, one of the most prestigious consulting firms in downtown Chicago. The building was all glass and steel on the outside, all marble and ego on the inside, the kind of building that was designed to communicate, before you even stepped off the elevator, that the people who worked here were important and knew it. The lobby alone had art on the walls that probably cost more than my student loan debt, which is a sentence I do not say lightly. I had taken the job because I needed the money desperately. My student loans were drowning me. My roommate had just moved out without warning and without her half of November's rent. And my bank account was looking at me the way disappointed parents look at report cards, with a kind of resigned disappointment that suggested it had expected this. Had always expected this, and was tired. I had a degree in environmental science from the University of Illinois that I couldn't seem to make useful in a way that also paid the bills. I had applied to a dozen jobs in my field and been turned down for all of them, usually at the interview stage, usually after a moment where I could see the interviewer recalibrating their interest in response to something about me, my youth, my inability to perform the kind of confident authority they were looking for, the lingering bruise under my foundation that I had not quite been able to cover. I had a bruise on my left forearm that I kept covered with long sleeves even in July. I'm getting to that part. The cleaning agency had posted a listing on 3 job boards at once. Night shift, downtown building, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. The pay was better than I expected. The agency had a contract with the building, and the rate reflected the building's status. I applied on a Tuesday evening, was called for an orientation by Wednesday afternoon, and started the following Monday. It was the most efficient hiring process I'd experienced in a year of job searching, and I took that as a sign. The way you take anything as a sign when you're desperate enough. The cleaning crew worked from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. By the time we arrived, most of the company's employees had gone home. The offices were quiet and still, the kind of quiet that has texture to it, a quality of held breath. You heard the hum of computers left on standby, the faint smell of expensive coffee gone cold, the soft click of cleaning carts rolling across polished floors. The building was beautiful in its stillness in a way. It probably wasn't during the working day when it was full of ambition and urgency. I liked the work more than I expected to. There was something honest about cleaning. You saw the truth of how people lived when they thought no one was watching, the messy desks of the people, who presented as perfectly composed in meetings. The half-eaten lunches thrown away in what appeared to be a hurry or perhaps shame. The sticky notes that said things like, "You can do this," or "Call Mom," and then beneath that, underlined, "Seriously, call Mom." I found a small handwritten list once that read, in someone's cramped handwriting, "Be kinder. Sleep more. Stop saying sorry when you don't mean it. Start saying sorry when you do." I kept that one. I put it in my pocket and I read it in the break room later, and I thought, whoever you are, I understand all of this. I worked the executive floor. Floor 22, which was the top of the building and housed the partners, the senior associates, and the CEO's office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Lake Michigan on one side and the Chicago River on the other. I had been warned about this floor during orientation by my supervisor, a pragmatic woman named Dolores Baptiste, who had been cleaning offices in the city for 30 years and carried the wisdom of those years in her expression, specifically in her left eyebrow, which communicated a comprehensive range of opinions with minimal movement. Floor 22 is the top dogs, Dolores told me, giving me the building tour on my first evening. Most nights, they're all gone by 7. There are some partners who work late. Mr. Kavanaugh, usually don't bother him. He's harmless but focused. Ms. Weston leaves a mess on purpose, I swear, but she tips at Christmas. So she paused at the supply closet on 22 and showed me the layout. The CEO, Miss Harlow, she works late every night, never seemed to know when she's going home. You won't bother her, she won't bother you. She's not unkind. She's not a small talk person. Got it, I said. I mean it, Delaware said with the firmness of someone who had learned from experience. Don't go trying to make her into a friend. She doesn't need friends from the cleaning crew. She's got her whole world, you understand? Your job is your job. Do it well, do it quiet, and we'll get along fine. I heard the warning with perfect clarity. What Dolores didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I was not looking for friends anywhere. I had barely enough energy to survive each day. The idea of trying to build any kind of human connection felt as plausible and as desirable as running a marathon in flip-flops. I was in survival mode, operating on the minimum fuel required to get through a shift and get home and lie in the dark for a few hours before doing it again. Friendship felt like a luxury from another person's life. That my first week on floor 22, I saw Alexandra Harlow exactly twice. Both times she was behind the glass wall of her corner office, seated at her desk in the kind of focused stillness that made her look like a carefully rendered painting. She was tall, I could tell even from her seated posture. There was a length to her that communicated height, with dark hair cut in a clean, precise way just above her shoulders, no nonsense without being severe. Late 30s, maybe touching 40. The kind of face that was more interesting than conventionally pretty, all sharp. Intelligent lines, a strong jaw, cheekbones that caught the office light in a way that made you look twice. There was something controlled about how she held herself, an economy of movement that suggested someone who had learned to be deliberate. The first time I saw her clearly, I was cleaning the glass partition near her office and I happened to glance in. She was reading something, a hand propped under her chin. And the absorption in her face was complete. She was entirely elsewhere. In whatever the document was telling her, and the world outside that document did not exist for her. I found myself watching her for a moment longer than was appropriate and then looked quickly back at the glass I was cleaning. The second time, she looked up as I passed with my cart. Our eyes met for 2 seconds, maybe 3. She gave me a small, professional nod, not unfriendly, not warm. The kind of acknowledgement you give a person when you want them to know they've been seen without inviting further interaction, and looked back down at her papers. I kept moving. She didn't need small talk. I didn't have any to offer. We existed on the same floor for 5 nights a week in a comfortable and entirely professional non-relationship, and that was fine. That was more than fine. Then August came and everything started to change. The bruise on my forearm was from Marcus. I need to say that plainly, without the softening that had become second nature to me. Because I spent a year softening it so gradually and so skillfully that it had nearly disappeared. And when you make something invisible, you can't see it clearly enough to change it. Marcus Reed was my boyfriend of 2 years. He was 29, handsome in a broad-shouldered, easy-smiling way, and charming in the specific way of people who understand very well how charm functions and deploy it strategically. He was the kind of man that other people, particularly other women, particularly my mother, described as a good catch, with an emphasis that suggested I should be grateful. He had a good job in finance. He had lovely manners in public. He remembered birthdays and brought the right wine to dinner parties and said the things that made people like him. He was, to everyone who didn't live inside our relationship, an excellent boyfriend. The first time he hurt me, it was 18 months in. We had argued, a real argument, louder and more honest than our usual disagreements, about something I can't even remember now. Something small that had accumulated weight from many other small things. He grabbed my arm to stop me from walking away from the argument. He grabbed it hard, the grip tightening when I tried to pull away. And when he finally let go, there were 4 distinct finger-shaped marks pressed into my skin. He was horrified. That is the honest truth. His horror was genuine. He had not intended it. He had never done anything like that in his life. He had grown up watching his father treat his mother badly, and he had sworn to himself, at 12 years old, that he would never be that person. He held me and he wept, and he said everything that needs to be said in those moments, and I believed him because I needed to believe him, and because the man holding me, crying with real tears, did not seem like the same person who had gripped my arm hard enough to leave marks. The second time was 6 months later. The third time was a month after that. By the 5th time, I had a routine, concealer in a specific shade, long sleeves regardless of temperature, a story ready if anyone asked. The stories were things I had barely noticed myself developing: running into a doorframe, a bruise from moving furniture, a clumsy collision at the gym. Small, plausible, forgettable. I told them automatically, without thinking, the way you say fine when someone asks how you're dot. By the time I started working at Harlow and Associates, I had been in this routine for 8 months. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the night shifts. I was tired of managing. I was tired of the constant low-level vigilance, the monitoring of his moods, the careful navigation of his triggers, the way I had learned to make myself small and quiet and agreeable to reduce the probability of escalation. I had shrunk myself down to something that fit in the space between his unpredictability and my own survival. And I had done it so gradually that I almost couldn't remember what my original dimensions had been, what I want you to understand, particularly if you are reading this from inside a similar story, is that I did not think of myself as a victim. That word felt enormous and heavy and like it belonged to someone else's narrative, someone whose situation was somehow more severe, more clearly defined. I thought of myself as someone in a complicated situation, someone who loved a flawed person and was working on how to help him, someone who had made a significant investment in a relationship and was not ready to accept that the investment was lost, someone who kept thinking that if she could just find the right approach, the right tone, the right configuration of herself, things would stabilize. This is the central lie of abusive relationships, the belief that you have the power to change them if you find the right combination. It keeps you working on a problem that cannot be solved with the tools you have been given. I thought about it at work, though in the honest quiet of the empty offices. The questions would come in the corridor while I pushed my cart. Could I afford to live alone? I had been over the math 100 times and it never added up. Was I being dramatic? His friends liked him so much. Did I still love him? This one I could not answer cleanly. Was what I described to myself as love actually fear that had worn love's clothes for so long it had started to believe its own costume? Was I going to be doing this, the long sleeves, the concealer, the careful stories, the constant low-level management of my own life forever? The offices didn't answer me, but they held the questions gently in their quiet way, which was more than I could do for myself. Then a Wednesday in late July came that changed the trajectory of everything, though I didn't know it was that kind of day when it started. It was brutally hot outside, one of those Chicago summer nights when the air itself feels personally offended by the need to support human life. The humidity was the kind that makes you feel like you're trying to breathe through a warm, wet cloth. I had come in from the bus stop, sweating, grateful for the air conditioning of the lobby. And when I had loaded my cart and headed for the elevator, I had been warm enough that without thinking about it, without the usual moment of conscious decision, I had pushed my sleeves up to my elbows. I was halfway through my cleaning round on floor 22, about 45 minutes into the shift, deep in the methodical focus of the work, when I realized the moment of realization was like a cold shock of water. I stopped in the middle of the corridor and looked down at my bare forearm. The bruise was visible, a mottled purple-green shape, about 3 inches wide, sitting just below the elbow, the kind of mark that could not be attributed to clumsiness or furniture. It was the shape of a grip. Anyone who knew what they were looking at would know what they were looking at. I yanked my sleeve down and looked up. The floor was quiet and mostly dark. Most offices empty, lights off. Except one. The corner office. Alexandra Harlow's office with its warm desk lamp and its view of the lake, and her in it, but not at her desk. She was standing at the window with her back to me, phone pressed to her ear, apparently looking out at the city. Her back was to me. She might not have seen. She almost certainly hadn't seen. I told myself she hadn't seen anything. I finished the floor quickly and left without looking at the corner office again. I worked efficiently, methodically, sleeve firmly down. And when I was done, I loaded my cart and headed for the elevator without pausing. As I passed the corner office on my way out, I heard her voice, low, controlled, the end of a professional call. I'll review the brief in the morning. Thank you, good night. The elevator doors opened and I stepped in. And just before the doors closed, I heard it, good night, not into the phone. The call had ended. It was said into the empty corridor, into the space where I had just been. Or possibly. To me, I stood in the elevator for 3 floors. The door sliding open and closed around me while I stood with my cart and my covered arm and tried to determine whether I had imagined it. I had not imagined it. That much, eventually, I was sure of. 3 days later, a Saturday, I found a paper coffee cup sitting on top of my cleaning cart, which I kept in the supply closet near the elevator on floor 22. The closet was locked when I wasn't on shift. Only the cleaning crew had keys. The cart was mine. I stood in the doorway of the supply closet and stared at the cup. It was from the coffee bar on the lobby level, a decent place with decent beans. Still warm enough that I could feel the heat through the side of the cup when I picked it up. There was a small sticky note attached with a single strip of tape. The note said, in a neat, controlled hand, "The lobby cafe keeps fresh coffee until 8 p.m. if you ever want a proper break. The hot water dispenser on 22 makes passable tea if that's your preference." I stood in the supply closet for a very long time. I read the note 5 times. Then I folded it carefully along its crease and put it in the front pocket of my uniform where I kept my phone. And I picked up the coffee cup, and I stood for a moment longer. Someone had seen me. Someone had thought, separately from the act of seeing me, about my comfort. Someone had gone to the lobby, purchased a coffee at, I checked the time stamp on the cup sleeve, 7:45 p.m. Brought it up to floor 22, found the supply closet. Left it on my cart and written a note. All without any particular expectation that I would know it had been her. All without requiring a response. All without making it a moment I would have to navigate or explain. It was, objectively, a small thing. A cup of coffee. A note about a hot water dispenser. And yet it was doing something remarkable in my chest. It was sitting there like a small, warm light in a space that had been very dark for a long time. I drank the coffee, walking my circuit of the floor. It was good. I thought about the note the whole time. The following Wednesday, there was another cup. This one had a note that said, "The market on Wabash has very good croissants if you have time before your shift. Just a tip." Next to the cup, this time was a small individually wrapped chocolate from the executive floor's kitchenette. On the 3rd, Wednesday, a cup and a note that said, "Weather report suggests rain tonight. If you need to wait out the bus schedule, the lobby has seating until midnight. No one will bother you." I started collecting the notes. I put them in a small tin box I kept at the back of my closet, alongside my passport and the copy of my birth certificate and a small photograph of my grandmother. The things that mattered in ways that were hard to explain. I started paying different attention to Alexandra Harlow. Not a stalker's attention, nothing intense or deliberate, but the way your awareness of a person shifts when they have extended you a specific kindness. You begin to notice them more fully. She was there most nights I was on the floor. Sometimes in meetings in the glass conference room, speaking with serious people who leaned forward when they listened to her. Sometimes alone at her desk, typing with focused intensity, pausing occasionally to stare at the screen with an expression of deep concentration that reminded me of a surgeon's face above an operating table. Once I saw her at the whiteboard in her office, alone drawing diagrams and talking quietly to herself, working something out, and the unguarded humanness of it caught me so off guard that I stopped my cart and watched for a moment before catching myself and moving on. She was. I was beginning to understand not quite what I had first assumed. The expensive suits and the sharp face and the corner office authority had given me one story about her. But she stayed late every night not because anyone made her. She was the CEO. The building was hers. She could leave whenever she wanted. She stayed because she genuinely seemed to love the work in the way that only makes sense if the work is also the person. I watched her be patient with junior employees who caught her in the hall with questions she could easily have delegated. Once I watched her spend the better part of 20 minutes listening to a nervous young associate explain a problem. And she gave the associate her whole attention. No phone checking, no clock watching, just focused. Generous listening and real questions that showed she had understood. She was quietly, unfussily kind. The coffee notes continued. Each one small. Each one specific. A note about the weather. A note about a good podcast relevant to something I'd mentioned in passing. A note that said, during a week when I had a persistent cold that I had mentioned briefly to Dolores, found these in the supply kit. Hope you feel better soon. And attached to the note, a pack of zinc lozenges. I never responded to the notes. I didn't know how, and I wasn't sure it was my place to respond. And there was a part of me that was afraid that acknowledging the kindness would somehow change its nature. Turn it into something that required more from me than I had to give. It is a very particular kind of poverty, the one that makes you afraid to receive, but I kept every note. I kept all of them, and I thought about her more than was sensible. I thought about her in the early mornings after my shift. lying in the darkened apartment before sleep, turning over in my mind the specific way she had chosen to respond to the evidence of my bruise, not with confrontation, or pity or the terrible well-intentioned questions of people who want to help in ways that are really about making themselves feel useful. She had left coffee. She had pointed toward a bench with a good view. She had said goodnight into an empty corridor and let the matter rest there, complete and uncomplicated. What kind of person does that? I kept thinking. What kind of person sees a stranger suffering and responds to it with coffee and the location of a quiet bench, and nothing more? A kind one, the obvious answer said. But it was more specific than kindness. It was a kind that understood something about the particular dignity required when a person is in a situation they are not ready to name. She had not forced the situation to be named. She had just made it a little less lonely. It was mid-August when we first actually spoke. Spoke properly, with real words and real content, in a way that constituted conversation rather than the minimal professional exchange of nods and goodnights. I was on the floor later than usual that night. One of the big conference rooms had been used for a client dinner, a fancy one, catered. The kind that leaves behind a tidal zone of crumbs and wine rings and crumpled napkins and the particular topography of a meal eaten by people who were performing casualness while actually being very tense. The cleanup was substantial and I was meticulous about it because doing the work, was one of the few things in my life that felt completely under my control. By the time I finished and loaded my cart, it was nearly midnight. I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby to find that the world had staged a spectacular event while I was inside dealing with other people's dinner mess. The storm had come in off the lake without warning and was now producing the kind of rain that makes meteorological history. Horizontal sheets of water hammering the glass facade of the building. Lightning cracking the sky and white-purple flashes over the lake. Thunder that you felt in your ribs. The doormen were standing back from the doors looking philosophical about it. The few people in the lobby were gathered near the windows staring out with the expressions of people who have committed to a plan and are watching it become impossible. My bus stop was 2 blocks north. I had no umbrella. I had left it at the apartment that morning because the sky had been clear and I had made the classic Chicago mistake of trusting a clear sky. I had a thin cotton cardigan over my uniform. My shoes were canvas. I could calculate the outcome of this with precision. I would be soaked to the skin before I reached the corner. I was standing there doing this calculation, looking at the options, finding none of them good, when I heard a voice slightly behind me. No umbrella? I turned. Alexandra Harlow was standing perhaps 4 feet away, coat folded over one arm, a sleek black umbrella in her other hand. She was, I noticed with a particular clarity of unexpected proximity, even taller than I had imagined from a distance, a few inches taller than me, which put her around 5'9". She was looking at me with an expression that was not pitying but was assessing. The way she looked at problems she was deciding whether to solve. "I'll be fine," I said. The reflex was so automatic by then that the words came before any thought. She looked at me for a moment with the particular expression of someone who knows when they're being managed. Then she looked out at the rain. "My car service is running about 20 minutes late. I was going to wait by the door anyway." A pause. "I could wait with you. The rain might ease up. You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," she said, simply, with no performance attached to the words. And then she moved to stand near the window overlooking the storm, leaving a comfortable few feet between us, and she looked out at the lightning. I didn't leave. I'm not sure I could fully explain, even now, why I stayed. It had something to do with that phrase, I know, and the absence of any weight in it. She had not said "I want to," or "I don't mind," or "it's no trouble," all of which would have implied an obligation on my part, a debt of gratitude, a transaction. She had said "I know." As in, I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to anyway. No explanation required. No thank you needed. It was unexpectedly a relief. We stood side by side watching the storm for a while. The lightning was extraordinary, long branching forks over the lake, reflecting back in the black water. There was something almost theatrical about it, as if the city had decided to put on a show. "Do you live far?" she asked without looking at me. "Logan Square," I said. "About 40 minutes on the bus on a good night." She nodded once, still looking at the storm. "You can take my car when it arrives." "I'm not going to do that." She turned and looked at me then. And there was something in her eyes, not frustration. More like restrained amusement at a pattern she was recognizing. "You're resistant to help." Something about her directness made me want to be direct back. "I don't like imposing." "You're not imposing," I offered. There's a meaningful distinction between an imposition and an accepted offer. This was, I thought, a very CEO thing to say. "I didn't say that." I looked back at the rain dot after a moment. "I'm Serena." I don't know why I said it. Some instinct, the instinct of someone who's been seen more in the last few weeks than in the last year and who wants, at some level, to be known. "I know," she said. And then Delors introduced the new crew members at the start of the contract. I have a good memory for names. A brief pause. "I'm Alexandra." "I know," I said back. The echo of her own phrase made the corner of her mouth move, the smallest possible smile. The restraint of someone who doesn't give smiles away easily and therefore means them when they come. It was, I thought with some surprise, beautiful. Not pretty in a conventional sense, but beautiful in the way that honesty is beautiful. Specific and earned out. We watched the rain together for another few minutes. It didn't ease up. When a brief lull suggested the worst might have passed, I thanked her and stepped out, pulling the cardigan around me and jogging the 2 blocks to my stop. I was completely soaked within a minute. The cardigan was essentially decorative at that point. My shoes made a sound like small applause with every step, but I was smiling. I didn't notice until I caught my own reflection in the dark window of the bus as I sat down, a wet, somewhat wild-haired woman with a smile that was too large for the situation. I looked at my reflection and thought, when was the last time you smiled like that? I couldn't remember. That seemed important, a week after the storm. I came to work with a split lip dot. I had done what I could with it, a careful layer of lip liner in a nude shade. A specific lip treatment that reduced the visible swelling if applied consistently. I had practiced the expression in the bathroom mirror, neutral, unremarkable, unrevealing. In the apartment light, in my own mirror, it had looked okay. The split was small. The swelling was manageable. Dolores saw it within 30 seconds of my arriving at the building. She was at the sign-in desk in the basement, doing the shift handover paperwork, and she looked up when I came in and her eyes went immediately to my lip and something moved in her face, a very controlled, very specific something, 30 years of experience managing what it communicated. "Serena," she said. Just my name. A complete sentence in 2 syllables. "I'm fine," I said. Automatic. Immediate. She was quiet for a moment. She put down her pen with the deliberateness of someone choosing their words. "There's a corkboard in the break room. By the refrigerator. Has a card on it for the Employee Assistance Program. You can call them about anything." "Anything at all?" She met my eyes steadily. "No reason needed. Just people to talk to." "Okay," I said. "Thank you." She put one hand briefly on my forearm, on the spot where the bruise usually was. Though tonight the worst of it had faded and the touch was careful and deliberate, there for a second and then released. She picked her pen back up. "There's a new mop head for your cart. I left it in the closet on 22. Thanks, Dolores." And that was it. She planted the seed and stepped back from it and let me decide what to do with it. No pressure, no drama, no questions I hadn't consented to answer. Just the card on the corkboard and the knowledge that she had seen. And the understanding that she had made it known without requiring anything from me, I thought, on my way up to floor 22, that this was the second time a woman in this building had seen me clearly and responded with the exact right thing. There was something in that worth noticing. The floor was quiet. I got my cart. I started my round. The lip throbbed with the rhythm of my heartbeat, which is its own kind of company. I cleaned the conference room, the associate offices, the copy room, the partner suites. I did the work well because I always did the work well. It was the thing I had. Near the end of my shift, 11:30 or so, the building deeply quiet now. I was in the hallway outside the main conference room when the door to Alexandra's office opened and she came out. She didn't usually come out this late. Her pattern was to work in the office and let me work around her. But that night she walked out to the water cooler at the end of the hall, and we were suddenly in the same narrow slice of space. I kept my face still and my eyes on the baseboards I was supposed to be doing. But she had already seen. I know because I watched the micro-expression, watched her eyes go to my lip, watched the almost imperceptible tightening at the corners of her own, the brief compression that she smoothed back to neutral within a second. She had seen. She knew what she was looking at. And then she looked away. She filled her water cup from the cooler. She looked at the window at the end of the hall where the city was dark and lit and beautiful. She drank her water. And then she said, very quietly, in the conversational tone of someone who is prepared to sound unconversational, "Have you ever been to the Riverwalk? Early in the morning, I mean, before it gets busy with tourists and joggers?" I kept my eyes on the baseboard. "No, it's worth going," she said. "This time of year, especially. There's a bench by the Deuceable Bridge, east side of the bridge, facing the lake. If you're there just after sunrise, you can see the light come up over the water. It's completely quiet. There's something about that kind of quiet. It's different from indoor quiet. It's the kind that makes it easier to think. A pause. About things." I looked at her then. Our eyes met across the hallway. And what I saw in our gaze was not pity. I want to be clear about that because pity would have made me close up immediately, and it didn't. It was something more considered. It was the look of someone who understood from personal experience what it meant to need a place to think about things, and who was offering the information because it might help and not because she needed credit for offering it. She had lived something, this woman. That was what I was seeing. Not a performance of compassion, but the real thing arrived at through personal geography. "Maybe I'll try it," I said. "Maybe you will," she said. She refilled her water cup. "Good night, Serena." "Good night," I said. She went back to her office. I stood in the hallway with my cart for a moment, my lip throbbing. The building quiet around me. The next morning after my shift, I went home and slept for 5 hours, and then I woke up and went to the Riverwalk. I found the bench by the Deuceable Bridge, east side. I sat in the September morning light and watched the sun come up over Lake Michigan. And the quiet was exactly what she had described, the particular quality of outdoor quiet that contains instead of constrains, that makes space for thought instead of filling it. I sat there for almost 2 hours. And for the first time in a year and longer, maybe, I thought clearly about my own life. Not about how to manage it or navigate it or make it survivable, but about it plainly from the outside. Who was I becoming in this situation? What was it costing me? Was the cost worth anything I was getting in return? The answers were not comfortable, but they were honest. And honest was what I needed. When I got home, I wrote down the number from the employee assistance card. I put it in my phone under the contact name Coffee, a private joke that only I understood and that made me feel briefly, unexpectedly, like myself again. I called it that afternoon. September arrived like a new chapter opening. The air in Chicago shifted from humid oppression to the first clear hints of autumn, crisp mornings, sunsets that went orange and gold over the lake in ways that made you forgive the summer for what it had done to you. I was settling at work. I was good at the job, and I knew it, and Dolores knew it, and that meant something. I was also seeing Dr. Aday's essay every week. She had an office in a quiet building in Wicker Park, and she was a small, calm woman with enormous perceptive intelligence, and the specific gift of asking questions that unlocked rooms you hadn't known you'd closed. Our sessions were sometimes difficult and sometimes revelatory and sometimes just exhausting. And I went to all of them because I had decided, that morning on the Riverwalk bench, that I was going to do this properly. That I was going to do it for myself. We talked about the relationship in the specific language of what it was, which was something I had not done before, not with myself and not with anyone else. Saying the words out loud was, at first, physically difficult. My throat would close around them. But I kept saying them, session after session, until they were just words and not a verdict on my character or my intelligence or my worth as a person. Words like abuse, fear, not safe, need to leave. I was also, with Dr. Osei's guidance, developing a plan. She was careful not to push me. She'd explained that pressure to leave before a person is ready can actually make the situation more dangerous, and that my timeline was mine. But she was helping me understand what leaving would require, and what resources I had, and who in my life might be a safe harbor. Priya Singh, my college friend, had been on the periphery of my reduced social life for 2 years, patiently waiting for me to call her. I had called her in September, and she had said what she always said, which was, "I've been waiting for this call. What do you need?" And I had said, "I'll tell you soon. Just be there," and she had said, "Always." In parallel to all of this interior work, something was happening on floor 22 that I was trying to look at honestly. Alexandra Harlow and I were beginning to talk, not dramatically. Not in ways that would have been visible from the outside as anything other than the occasional brief exchange between a CEO who worked late and a cleaning woman who worked the floor. But the exchanges had shifted in quality since the night of the Riverwalk conversation. There was something between us that had been named, at least privately, at least to ourselves. She had seen me. I had seen her seeing me. We had carefully, appropriately acknowledged it. One evening she stopped me in the hall to ask how I was settling into the job. And we ended up talking for the better part of 10 minutes about environmental waste management in commercial buildings. She had noticed I mentioned my degree in environmental science, and she was, I discovered rapidly, genuinely knowledgeable about the subject, not the polite surface knowledge of a CEO who has read one article, but real engagement with the complexity of the problem. She asked questions that showed she understood the systems involved. She made connections I hadn't expected. When I mentioned the building's single-stream recycling setup and why it was significantly less effective than it looked, she listened with the focused attention she gave everything important and said, thoughtfully, "That's fixable. We should look at that." 3 weeks later, the building switched to compostable containers in the executive cafeteria. A small sign appeared in the kitchen explaining the composting pilot program and its environmental rationale. The sign was brief and clear and smart, and it said exactly the right things. I thought about that sign for longer than was strictly reasonable. The Wednesday coffees continued through September and into October. Notes about the weather and the city and small relevant things. Once, during a conversation about a book I'd mentioned, she slipped a post-it into the coffee sleeve that said, "Chapter 12, you'll see why." I had been given the book recommendation conversationally. The post-it was her circling back after I mentioned I'd started it, which meant she'd remembered. Which meant she'd been listening. She was always listening. I began to understand something about Alexandra Harlow that I think she did not fully understand about herself. She was a person who gave great attention, as a matter of course, to the people she cared about. She did it quietly and without announcement, the way people do the things that come most naturally to them. She probably did not think of it as remarkable. But for someone who had spent years learning to need very little, the experience of being attended to, genuinely, consistently, without agenda was remarkable. It was, in fact, transformative. I will not pretend that during this period I was not developing feelings that exceeded the professional and the admiring. I knew I was. I sat with the knowing with the careful honesty I was practicing in all things, and I acknowledged to myself, I am falling in love with this woman. I am falling in love with her intelligence and her private kindness and the way she talks about the work she loves and the way she left a sticky note about a Riverwalk bench the night she saw evidence of my suffering. I am falling in love with the way she chooses her words and the micro-expression of the almost smile in the compostable containers. I was also aware acutely, clearly, but I was not in a position to act on any of it. I had a situation to exit first. I had a life to rebuild. I had, at my most honest, no reliable access to my own judgment about love given how profoundly I had misjudged the last significant relationship of my life. The smart thing, the responsible thing, was to let these feelings be what they were, a source of warmth, a reason to keep working, a lighthouse in dark water. Nothing more, but I let myself feel them. At a safe distance, I let them be real. October turned the city gold and then began stripping it down. I left Marcus on a Wednesday afternoon in October. It was planned, I want to be clear about that, because planned leaving looks nothing like the dramatic flights in movies. And I spent a long time feeling like my leaving wasn't real or valid because it wasn't cinematic. But planned leaving is actually better than cinematic leaving. Planned leaving is what keeps you safe. Dr. Osei and I had spent the better part of 6 weeks building the safety plan. This involved identifying where I would go. Priya's apartment in Evanston, she had a second bedroom and had been waiting for this call for 2 years. Making sure copies of my important documents were somewhere other than the apartment I shared with Marcus. I kept them in my work locker at the cleaning agency's office on the basement level of the building. Dolores had given me the locker without asking why, the way she did many things. packing a bag and keeping it in the trunk of Priya's car so I wouldn't have to carry anything large on the day. Identifying a day when Marcus would be reliably elsewhere for long enough, Wednesdays. He played pickup basketball on Wednesdays, a standing game with his friends from work, 3 to 5 hours. He was never back before 7. Priya picked me up outside the apartment building at 3:30 in the afternoon. She drove a green Subaru with a bumper sticker that said nevertheless she persisted, which I appreciated aesthetically. She was wearing her serious expression, which meant she had prepared herself not to cry until I did. I walked out with one bag over my shoulder, a weekend bag. Unremarkable, the kind anyone might carry for any reason. I had the bag in my locker and Priya's car waiting and nothing that required me to go back. I did not look back. I want to say that definitively as a fact, I did not look back. Not because I felt nothing, I felt enormous things. But because I had rehearsed this moment enough times in my mind that I knew if I turned around, I would start second-guessing. And I had done enough second-guessing to last the rest of my life. I got in Priya's car. She looked at me for one long moment and then she said, "Okay, let's go." And she drove us to Evanston. The first week was the hardest and the strangest. Grief does not wait for you to be ready for it. I cried for 3 days, not consistently, but in waves that came when they wanted to, over coffee or in the shower or once, memorably in the middle of a Walgreens. I cried for the 2 years I had invested and the version of that relationship I had kept believing in even as the evidence against it mounted. I cried for the girl I had been before and for the time I had lost, and for the specific loneliness of loving someone who was simultaneously hurting you. The grief was real and I let it be real because doctors say had been clear. You cannot rush past what you have lost. You can only move through it. Priya fed me soup. Priya watched reality television with me in the evenings without comment or judgment. Priya said exactly once, "I've been waiting 2 years for this," and then she never said it again. She was exactly the friend I needed, and I said so. And she told me to shut up and eat my soup. By the end of the first week, something had shifted. I woke up on Sunday morning in Priya's guest room. The sun coming through the curtains, and I took a breath, a full breath. The kind that goes all the way to the bottom of your lungs, and the thought that came was not about Marcus at all. It was, I can breathe. It was, I am safe. It was, this is what not being afraid feels like, and I forgot. That Sunday evening, I went back to work. I was not ready to tell anyone what had happened. The leaving was too new, too tender to be shared, like something that needed time in its own skin before being introduced to the world. I went to the agency, I got my cart, I went up to floor 22. The floor was quiet in the usual way. I started my round. The work was comforting in its familiarity, the specific order of tasks, the smell of the cleaning products, the particular satisfaction of a polished surface. I worked the associate offices, the partner suites, the copy room. Near the end of my shift, I was in the corridor outside the main conference room when I heard Alexandra's voice from inside her office. She was on a call. Something about a quarterly review, her voice measured and precise and professional. I cleaned the corridor. I cleaned the conference room. I loaded my cart. On my way to the elevator, I paused outside her office. The call had ended. The office was quiet. Her door was slightly open, as it sometimes was when she was working late and not on a call. She was sitting at her desk with her elbows on the surface and her hands pressed against her face, rubbing her eyes in the specific gesture of someone who has been focusing hard for a long time. It was an unguarded moment, private and human and tired. In the profound way of someone who gives a great deal and doesn't always account for the cost of giving. She lowered her hands and saw me in the doorway. There was a second of mutual recognition. The way there always was now, a second of something. The lobby cafe closes at 8, I heard myself say. Which was an hour ago, so that doesn't help. But are you all right? She stared at me for a moment with the expression of someone processing an unexpected input. I had asked the CEO of a consulting firm if she was all right while standing in her doorway with a cleaning cart. The floor seemed to tilt slightly. Then she said, "Honestly? Not particularly. Long day." And then, with a slight emphasis, "Are you?" I held the question for a moment. "I left my boyfriend today," I said. I had not planned to say it. It came out before I could apply any of the filters I had spent the past year developing. So no, but also yes. Both at once. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a room that is making space for what has just been said to settle in it properly. That takes genuine courage, she said. No fanfare. No drama. Just the clear, direct acknowledgement. It took 6 months. A therapist, my friend's car, and a very well-organized safety plan, I said. A real smile this time, not the corner of the mouth almost smile I had been cataloging since August. A full one with her eyes in it. Courage still. Especially with help. I looked at her for a moment in the office light. Then I said, "Good night, Alexandra." "Good night, Serena," she said. "Take care of yourself." I pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. I stepped in. I looked at the floor number display and thought, I am safe. I am out. I am beginning. In October, the cleaning schedule was adjusted to accommodate a series of industry events in the building, longer hours. Some schedule shifts, different rotations. Dolores put me on a start time of 8 p.m. instead of 6, which meant I was working while the last of the day staff were still leaving, and which put me in more direct overlap with Alexandra's working hours. We began to talk in ways that built on each other. Not immediately, not dramatically, the way good things build, which is slowly and with the patience of two people who have learned the hard way to be careful with good things, she asked me once, as I was cleaning the glass wall of the conference room adjacent to her office, how the EPA application was going. I had mentioned it only in passing weeks earlier, and the fact that she had remembered and was following up with genuine curiosity was the kind of thing that kept catching me off guard and making me feel. Each time, like the floor had shifted slightly in a good way, we talked about it for a while, the application, the interview, the particular intersection of policy and science that I was hoping to work in. She asked smart questions and I gave real answers, and she pushed back thoughtfully on a few points and agreed with others, and it was the kind of conversation that makes you feel more clearly like yourself when it's over. You have a facility for this, she said. Not as a compliment exactly, more as an observation. For seeing systems and the connections within them. That's the thing that's hardest to teach. Thank you, I said. And then, because honesty was something I was practicing, I went a long time not thinking of myself as someone with facilities for things. She was quiet for a moment. I understand that, she said. Not in a way that was reaching for solidarity or performing sympathy. Just this is true for me too. One evening in mid-October, she met me in the hallway outside the supply closet with 2 cups of coffee. She had clearly been waiting, not in a way that felt pressuring, just present. A deliberate choice to intercept the evening in a different way. I made an extra, she said, and offered me the second cup. I took it. We stood in the corridor and drank coffee and talked about the way October Light worked on the lake, and about a new urban farming initiative she'd read about, and about a documentary I'd mentioned the week before. At some point I realized we had moved without announcement into her office, into the chairs by the window. The ones with a view of both the river and the lake. The ones that were meant for the kind of conversation that requires 2 people to be comfortable enough to sit properly. We had not discussed this. We had simply drifted there, pulled by the current of a conversation that had gravity. She told me about building the company. She had started it at 29, fresh from a failed marriage to a man who had been, she said, very good at a kind of subtle diminishment that takes a long time to recognize because it never raises its voice. She'd been furious when she finally named it. This was a deliberate and mutual choice. We talked about it explicitly in our second and third meetings. The way 2 people talk about things explicitly when they have both learned that the things you don't talk about become the things that surprise you at the worst possible moment. I watched her choose her words with the deliberateness she always brought to things that mattered. What I hadn't accounted for, she said, was the possibility of you. Of meeting someone who I didn't know this was something I was still capable of feeling, Serena. Or maybe I had decided it wasn't. And then you were there in my building in the middle of the night, and there was something about the way you carried yourself. The way you were thoughtful and curious, and you were clearly carrying something enormous, and you were still kind. You were still interested in the world. Still willing to smile at something worth smiling at. She looked at me then directly. I started looking for excuses to know you better. I'm not sure you knew that. I suspected it, I said softly. The compostable containers were a clue. Something moved in her expression, fond and briefly embarrassed. I'm very transparent when I care about things. Yes, I agreed. She held my gaze. I'm in love with you. I want you to know that. Not as a prerequisite for anything, not as something that requires a particular response or that. I'm saying because I want something from you. I'm saying it because she stopped. Tried again. Because you deserve to know that you are loved. In specific, precisely, for who you actually are. I had been listening so carefully that it took me a moment to understand that she had finished. That the floor was mine. I stepped close to her, close enough that the winter cold between us disappeared. Close enough to see the particular quality of attention in her eyes. The steadiness of someone who is waiting for something and has decided to be patient regardless of what it is. I put my hands on either side of her face, carefully. With the care you give to something you want to keep, and I said, Alexandra, I have loved you since the first Wednesday. Since the sticky note that said nothing except, here's where to find coffee, here's where to find warmth. I have loved you since you stood in the lobby during a thunderstorm and waited with me without asking for anything in return. I have loved you since you told me about this bench, this specific bench, because you could see I needed somewhere to think, and you wanted to give it to me. I felt my voice steady itself. I have loved you in the way you become possible after a period of not being able to love anything well, the kind that comes back slowly, carefully, and then is absolutely certain. Her breath came out slowly. Her eyes closed briefly. I love you, I said. And knowing you has made me brave enough to say it the way you deserve to hear it. Directly, without conditions or qualifications. She opened her eyes. The thing that had been held carefully in her expression, the particular guardedness of someone who's been hurt enough to be careful, released. Just released. Like a window opened, she kissed me there on the Riverwalk. With the March Lake moving beside us and the city going about its ordinary Tuesday and the bench behind us and all of the history between us contained in that moment, it was not a perfect kiss in the movie sense. She knocked my chin gently with her chin at first, and we both laughed. And then it was better, warm and sure and entirely itself. The kiss of two people who have been patient and are no longer needing to be. When we stopped, she kept her forehead against mine. I could feel her breathing. I was nervous, she said. I know, I said. I could tell. I prepared, she admitted. I laughed against her cheek. Of course you did. We moved in together in June into her apartment in Lincoln Park, which she had lived in alone for 6 years and which was beautiful in the specific way of spaces that reflect their inhabitant honestly, clean, precise, full of good light, organized with the efficiency of someone who thinks clearly, with the 12 cacti arranged in there. Window court and a small handwritten list pinned above her desk that read things I'm working on in her precise handwriting. She made room in the closet with the deliberateness of someone who has read about the importance of physical space as an expression of welcome and is taking it seriously. She cleared 2 shelves in the bathroom without being asked. She hung my 2 environmental prints on the wall of the study and asked whether the height was right and moved them slightly when I said they were half an inch low. These are not small things. These are the architecture of being. Included, I kept my place at Priya's through the end of April and spent an increasing amount of time at Alexandra's through May. Gradual migration that we had talked about explicitly before it happened. As we talked about most things now. The conversation about living together was straightforward and honest, and involved some acknowledged nervousness on both our parts and a specific discussion about what it would mean for the dynamics we had, built in what we each needed in terms of space and quiet and the particular ways in which we were each still even now. People who needed to practice receiving. I've never lived well with anyone, Alexandra said, with the candor she had learned to give to vulnerable admissions. I've lived with people. I haven't always been good at it. What makes the difference? I asked. Wanting to, she said. And being willing to be told when I'm not. I can do that, I said. I know you can, she said. That's one of the things I love about you. You're honest in ways that are difficult, but that you do anyway because you understand why it matters. My mother called in May. I had not told her about Marcus, not all of it. She knew we had broken up, she did not know why, and I had not told her about Alexandra yet. Telling her about Alexandra meant coming out, which I had not done formally, which meant it was a conversation I had been approaching slowly and with the care of someone who loves their mother and is not certain how this will land. I drove to the suburb where my parents lived on a Saturday afternoon. In Maine, I told my mother over coffee in the kitchen, my mother, who baked when she was nervous and had made 3 kinds of cookies for a Saturday afternoon visit, which should have told me she already knew something was coming. She listened. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said very carefully, "Is she good to you?" "Yes," I said. "Very. Then I want to meet her," she said. "And then I also want to know what happened with Marcus. The real story. I've been waiting for the real story." I told her the real story. She cried. She was angry in the clean, protective way that mothers are angry when their children have been hurt, and the crying and the anger were happening simultaneously, which is something she has always been able to do. We sat in the kitchen for 2 hours and I told her everything and she listened to all of it and she said, "At the end, you got yourself out." "With help," I said. "Still," she said. Alexandra met my parents in June 2 weeks before the move. We had dinner at a restaurant in the Loop, neutral territory, nice but not intimidating, and Alexandra was, as she always was in high-stakes situations, completely prepared and deeply present. She talked to my father about infrastructure policy for 20 minutes with real engagement, and she talked to my mother about the composting pilot program at the EPA with genuine curiosity, and my mother, who had been watching Alexandra very carefully through all of this, said to me in the bathroom afterward, "She looks at you like you matter." "She does," I said. "That's all I needed to know," my mother said. The moving in went smoothly, which surprised us both, and then didn't. We had prepared for it the way we prepared for things, honestly, and with clear agreements about what we each needed. The first morning we woke up in the same bed in the apartment that was now ours, not hers. Ours. Alexandra lay on her side looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her before, unguarded. Quiet, fully there. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning," she said. And then, "I wasn't sure I'd get here." "To June?" I asked. "To this," she said. "This particular morning. This particular configuration of things." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought I might have missed the window for it." "You didn't," I said. "No," she said. "I didn't." Gerald the cactus watched us from the windowsill with his customary stoic approval. I am writing this on a Sunday morning in October, more than 2 years after I first rolled my cleaning car off the elevator onto floor 22 of the Harlow and Associates building. Alexandra is in the kitchen attempting something with eggs that she is described as genuinely straightforward, with the confidence of someone who has been wrong about this before. I can hear her talking to the board, the 12 cacti, which now occupy an entire windowsill in the apartment we share, and the smell of coffee is filling the rooms dot our apartment. We have lived here together for 4 months. She put my environmental prints on the walls before I moved in at exactly the right height. There are now 17 cacti. She added 5 since I moved in and maintains the fiction that this is normal. My EPA composting pilot program is expanding. We have 3 buildings in the program now, with 5 more in the application queue, and the data we've gathered has been cited in 2 separate policy reports. I go to work in the morning feeling the specific, full-bodied joy of someone who is doing what they were meant to do. Alexandra comes home in the evening and asks about my day with genuine interest and listens with the focused attention she gives to everything that matters. And I ask about hers and listen with the same. And we eat dinner and argue good-naturedly about the documentary choice and sometimes fall asleep on the couch. And it is the most ordinary thing in the world, and I never take it for granted. I see Dr. Osei every other week. I am not in crisis. I go because the work of understanding yourself is ongoing, and because I have decided, firmly and without negotiation, that I deserve to be well cared for, including by myself. This is a decision I renew every day. Some days it comes easily. Some days it takes effort. Both are fine. Alexandra sees her therapist. She is learning to receive things, kindness, compliments, rest, care, with something approaching ease. She still sometimes deflects when a moment requires her to simply be looked after. And I have developed a specific response to this deflection that involves waiting patiently until she notices. I'm waiting and then not saying anything until she says what she was trying to deflect past. This works reliably. She finds it both aggravating and deeply reassuring, which is exactly what I intended. Priya had dinner with us last week. She made an elaborate pasta dish and opened a very good bottle of wine and made exactly 4 toasts, 1 for leaving, 1 for beginning, 1 for building, and 1 that she said was for everything in between that. I'm not going to put into words because it would make all of us cry, and I just did my hair. We cried anyway. She did too. It was perfect. Alexandra's sister Caitlin came to visit in September. She and Alexandra spent a weekend talking about things they had needed to talk about for years, with the particular difficulty and relief of family truths finally named. And by Sunday evening, they were sitting on the couch together looking at old photographs and laughing about something from their childhood, and I made tea and brought it in without interrupting. And later Alexandra held my hand for a long time without saying anything, and I understood that this was its own kind of thank you. I do not wear long sleeves in the summer. Anymore. I want to talk about Marcus for a moment, because I think it matters. He is not a villain in this story. He is a person who did harmful things, who caused real harm to me, who needs help I am not qualified to give, and whose problem is not mine to solve, but he is not a cartoon. He was also a person in pain, a person with his own history, a person who had made bad choices and who will, I hope, eventually make better ones. I carry him not as a wound any longer, but as a chapter that cost me and taught me, and that is now complete. Forgiving him is not something I've done formally, with words. It is something that has happened gradually. The way the bruises faded, not dramatic, not announced. Just one day less present than the day before, until I noticed that what was there in their place was not absence, but something more like peace. If you are watching this, if you are reading this, and you are somewhere I have been, in the long sleeves and the careful stories, in the management of fear that has become so habitual you can no longer see it clearly, I want to say something to you. You are not too far in to get out. There is no version of this where you've been in it too long or made too many adjustments to recover yourself. The self you are managing around, the original one, the one with all the full dimensions, is still there. She's been waiting. She is patient. You do not have to leave dramatically. You do not have to leave immediately. You do not have to have it all figured out before you make the first call. The path only requires you to take the first step, call a hotline, tell one trusted person, search for a therapist, read about safety planning, give yourself permission to consider that things could be different. One step at a time in your own time, because the leaving has to come from you, and after the leaving, you will rebuild. You will find, as I did, that the architecture of yourself is more intact than you feared. The parts that matter, the curiosity and the kindness and the capacity for joy and the ability to love, are not the parts that get erased. They are the parts that survive. They are durable in ways you may have forgotten. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be seen in the way that Alexandra saw me, not with pity, not with dramatics, but with steady, practical, generous attention. You deserve to have someone notice what you are carrying and respond not by making it about themselves, but by making it slightly easier for you. Coffee on a cart. A quiet bench. A place to think. That kind of seeing exists. Those people exist. They are not rare. They are the people who, when they see evidence of suffering, reach for whatever they have to offer. They exist in your building. In your office. In a therapist's chair. In a friend who says, I've been waiting for this call. You will find them. Or they will find you. Alexandra just called from the kitchen that the eggs are ready and that they are honestly very good this time. She says this every time. Every time I go to the kitchen. Every time we eat the eggs. Every time I tell her they are excellent. This is, I understand now, exactly what love is, not the grand gestures, not the declaration on the Riverwalk in March, not the first coffee on the cart. Love is this, showing up for someone's optimism. Going to the kitchen. Sitting across from each other at a small table with mediocre eggs and good coffee, in a home you have made together out of your 2 histories and your shared willingness to try. That is the whole of it. That is what I wanted to tell you. Now I'm going to go eat my eggs.